Welcome to this video where we'll be talking about Ananda Vardhana. It is Dhvani that we are going to talk about, the structure of poetic meaning from Ananda Vardhana's Dhvanyaloka. Ananda Vardhana's Dhvani, the structure of poetic meaning. I am Dr. L.V. Padma Rani Rao, Professor and Head, PG Department of English and Research Center, Yashwant Mahavidyalaya Nanded, welcoming all of you to the discussion of Ananda Vardhana's Dhvanyaloka. The very name Kashmir has come into existence because sage Kashyapa moved in those areas. And wherever sage Kashyapa moved, the entire place is called as Kashmir, which was full of Kashmiri Pandits. During the 9th and 10th centuries, if you look into the Kashmiri Pandits, we have the name of Ananda Vardhana belonging to the 9th century and Abhinavagupta belonging to 10th and 11th centuries. When we talk about the introduction to Dhvanyaloka and Anandavardhana belonging to the 9th century was the author of Dhvanyaloka, a work articulating the philosophy of aesthetic suggestion. The philosopher Abhinavagupta, who came later after Anandavardhana, wrote an important commentary on it. Anandavardhana is credited with the creating of Dhvani theory, meaning sound or resonance, which is important in poetry. Dhvani theory in regard to the soul of poetry. When the poet writes, says Anandavardhana, he creates a resonant field of emotions. So it is the sounds which are important in poetry, and that becomes the soul of poetry, argues Anandavardhana. To understand the poetry, the reader or hearer must be on the same wavelength, and the method requires sensitivity on the parts of the writer as well as the reader. P.V. Kane, a wonderful modern aesthetician in Indian poetics, writes that the Dhvanyaloka is an epoch-making work in the history of Alankara literature. It occupies the same position in poetics as Panini's Ashtadhyayi in grammar and Shankaracharya's commentary on Vedanta, argues P.V. Kane. When we talk about Anandavardhana's Dhvanyaloka, it definitely marks the beginning of a new phase, Navina, in Indian poetics. The Dhvanyaloka of Anandavardhana marks a departure from the old ways of understanding kavya or poetry. It makes an attempt to study poetics from aesthetic point of view, assimilating all the essentials of various other schools of poetry. By giving prominence to rasa, Anandavardhana lends a new explanation to all the problems of poetics. According to that, Alankara, Riti, Guna are the different types of excellence that is observed in the Indian poetics, and they have their importance only in the context of Dhvani, the suggestion which is the soul of Kavya, according to Anandavardhana. When we talk about the older school of poetry, which are the Prachina schools of poetry of Bhamaha, Dandin, and Vamana, and various others that belong to about 7th century, dealt with the natural or human situation idealized by the poet for its own sake. The attention of the Prachina school was focused on ornamented figures of speech or alankaras and the beauty, sobha or karuta or karutva of the expression or on the body of poetry. Their rasa theory generally was based on the dramatic art form, which became the body of poetry. Therefore, it did not come under poetics properly. And hence, the new school of poetry, the Navina school of poetry, has come into existence, which pointed out that the reader should not stop at the expression, but should go further into the meaning that is suggested or hinted by the words that are used. This suggested sense is the essence of kavya. It differs from the expressed and the indicated sense. The Navina school laid more importance on the emotional content or the bhava of the kavya. But here, the emotive elements was not directly expressed in words or vachya, but had to be grasped by the readers indirectly, paroksha, through the suggestions offered by the words. And hence, through the description of the situation, the reader understands the emotion and derives that exalted delight, which is called as rasa. So, through words, he should go into the paroksha or indirect expression of the words, which is what is called as dhvani, in order to achieve rasa, is what is suggested by Ananda Vardhana. So, accordingly, in Dhvanyaloka stands on the apex. If you say gunas or doshas, which are the excellences or defects in poetry, to be the base, on top of it, you have the stylistic values, which are called as riti, the riti school of poetry. And then you have the figural mode or devices, which are the Alankara school of poetry, on top of the stylistics. On top of the figural mode or Alankara school, we have the aesthetic effect or Bharata Muni's rasa. In order to achieve rasa, Anandavardhana's dhvani or the suggested meaning that is derived by the suggestion of the words that are used in poetry, which he emphasizes in Dhvanyaloka, stands as the apex. So if you have a stepwise, the first is Gunado theory, and then the Riti theory, Alankara theory, Rasa theory, and to get the perfect rasa, it is Anandavardhana's dhvani that we need to understand. Kavihi karoti kavyam, rasam jananti panditaha, which means poetry is basically a verbal icon or verbal structure. As such, there cannot be any poetry without words. This is what exactly the new criticism of the 20th century school of poetics in the Western world also talks about. Therefore, any discussion on poetry necessarily involves a discussion on words. And hence, the poetry also invokes emotional response through words. Thus, the success of a good kavya or good poetry fundamentally involves three aspects: the poet's creative inspiration, which is called as pratibha, its form by way of the words, shabda, and the meaning, ardha, that is, body, sharira of the kavya, and the aesthetic effect that it has upon the readers through the words, which is the rasa. So it is Shabda plus Ardha, which becomes the Sharira of the Kavya, and the aesthetic effect or the rasa that it gives to the audience or the reader through the suggested meaning of the words, which becomes the soul of poetry. Kavaye Shrotuhu Samanau Anubhavas Tataha. Abhinav Gupta says the poet and an appreciative, cultured listener or reader share a common experience of delight, and both are partners in poetic experience. Each is inspired in his own manner. While the poet is blessed with a creative genius, Karayatri, which is an unaffected faculty, Prakhya Purana, the good hearted reader, Asahrudaya Rasika, is endowed with the receptive power, Bhavayatri, which lets him or her enjoy good poetry with delight, Aswadana. He empathizes with the poet, Upakhya, and recreates for his relish the poet's creative experience, Anusrishti. If the poet creates Srishti, the reader, creative experience of the reader is Anusrishti, right? Just as the moon reflects the glow of the sun. How beautifully it has been said by Abhinavagupta. Kavaye Shrotuhu, Kavaye Shrotruhu, Samanau Anubhavas Tataha. Adhikari Chatra Vimala, Pratibhana Sahrudayaha. Abhinavagupta says, if the poet has pratibha, the creative genius, the listener or the reader has its reflection or counterpart of pratibhana. Yaska remarks that the poet and the listener, each in his own manner, could even be called as a rishi or the seer. The poet creates, while the listener, through his pratibhana, also creates the exact meaning. And that's why both of them are seers. The poet has direct experience, Sakshat Rishi, and the listener derives the same delight by listening to the poet's expression. That's why he is Shruti Rishi. If one is Sakshat Rishi, poet is a Sakshat Rishi who creates, the listener or the reader is the Shruti Rishi. Shruti is to listen and create. The ultimate object of kavya is rasa, the aesthetic delight, as Bharatamuni has already said. As Taittiriya Upanishad remarks, labhvanandi bhavati. Rasam hi evayam labhvanandi bhavati. On experiencing rasa, one becomes truly blissful. And that's why there are three functions of words, Abhinavagupta says. It signifies or denotes abhida. Number two, it indicates lakshana. And number three, it suggests vyanjana. So one is denotative, the other is connotative, and the other is indicative. Denotative is called abhida, indicative is called lakshana, and suggestive is called as vyanjana. The meaning that is comprehended immediately after the word is uttered is its primary meaning, mukhya artha. The meaning thus conveyed, its relation to the next word, and its own meaning is a mutual relationship of the signifier and the signified, as Saussure says, vachya and vachika. The power that creates the relationship among the words is abhida vyapara, the power of denotation or sense. And the suggestive power of the word through vyanjana artha is the most important meaning that is communicated with the word. When we talk about Vyanjana Vritti or the suggestive function of words, the Vyanjana Artha, which is the suggested sense or the essence of the word, is most interesting and is much debated. This is based on the principle that the meaning of word is non-limited to its literal sense. That is, the word has the power to reach far beyond the obvious or the actual dictionary meaning. In poetry, the word acquires another power, Vyanjana Vritti or the suggestive function. It is the power which activates the potential hidden in the word. Through the suggestive function of the word, a new meaning or plurality of meanings emerges, transcending the obvious literal sense, far more beautiful and sensitive, isn't it? So, Vyanjanamurti makes the word sound more beautiful, suggestive, and sensitive. In good poetry, the suggested meaning dominates over the words and their literal meaning. As Ananda Vardhana puts it right, the later are compared to a woman's body and the former to her grace and beauty, which is a subtler manifestation and a more profound meaning of the womanhood. Only a Sahridaya with Pratibha or Vasana can truly enjoy the essence of beauty of Kavya. That is why it is remarked that the grammarians cannot truly appreciate and enjoy the rasa of good poetry, whereas a true reader, a Sahridaya with Pratibha and Vasana, can really enjoy the beauty of Kavya through the suggested meaning obtained. The Rig Vedam suggests one of the hymns of the Rig Vedam makes a distinction between a person who merely learns the literal meaning of a verse and a person who goes beyond the ordinary meaning of the words and tries to understand and grasp its inner significance. It says, the former just sees but does not see. He hears but does not hear. It is only to the latter that the speech reveals herself completely, just as a loving wife to her husband. In another passage of Rig Veda, it is said that the great poets select their words by winnowing away the chaff from the grain, and only the persons of equal learning and refinement can truly appreciate these poems. In Thank you very much for being a part of this video. Hope you have enjoyed it and understood Ananda Vardhana's Dhvanyaloka. See you in the next video. Bye for now.